Welcome to Monday's edition of Renew Plus. I'm Pastor Tony. Thank you for joining us for another week. This is week number 7 in our series Highway 316. We are looking at the reality of God's unconditional, unfailing love for us. And I can't think of a more important subject than to dwell on this for a few weeks and really become rooted and grounded in this reality right here. Now, we're going to pick back up kind of where we left off at the end of last week with some review, but not a whole lot. So let's go back over to Romans chapter 5 again. Romans, the 5th chapter. And we're going to pick up one verse to begin with here. Very important verse here in Romans chapter 5. In fact, for the next few weeks, we're going to be in and out of Romans chapter 5 quite a bit. And I believe you'll see why and as we go through this. Romans chapter 5 will become one of your favorite chapters in the Bible, just like mine, I believe, before it's over with. Romans chapter 5, verse number 5, Paul is writing, he says, "Now hope does not disappoint, because the love of God has been poured out in our hearts by the Holy Spirit who was given to us." Now notice right here, he's not just talking about the modern day version of hope. You know, in our modern day vernacular, we kind of use hope and wish synonymously. We kind of use hope in the sense of, I hope I don't get sick, or I hope we can go on this vacation, or I hope I can get this job. That kind of hope right there is more hit and miss. And that's not what he's talking about here. The kind of modern day description of hope or idea of hope is it could be good and it could be bad, and it's kind of mixed together. And we don't want to get our hopes up because it might leave you disappointed. Well, certainly this is not what this is talking about here, because he says, now hope does not disappoint. Other translations say, will not leave us ashamed, red-faced, or empty-handed. You know, what kind of statement or declaration is this right here? Because this just goes totally against our modern day idea of hope right here, to come out with that bold declaration that hope will not leave us disappointed, ashamed, or empty-handed. Well, it has to be based on something more than what our modern day hope is based on. Because really our modern day idea of hope is kind of based on what people would call chance or luck, just a roll of the dice. You just never know what's going to happen. We just hope things work out. This kind of hope right here, this is Bible hope. This is New Covenant, New Testament hope right here. And it says it will not leave us ashamed or disappointed. So it must be based on something more solid, something more steadfast, something more sure than just our modern day idea of hope. You know, again, this is in context really of Romans chapter 4, talking about Abraham and how he came to the place of being fully persuaded. I went into this quite a bit in another series entitled Faith Life we did previously. In fact, we did that last year. You can go back and listen to that if you hadn't already done so. We go into Romans chapter 4 in detail, but this wasn't originally written in chapter and verse right here. And we kind of do that for reference sake, and we need to. But we also have to keep in mind that chapter 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8, they all kind of flow together. This is a letter written by Paul to the church, to the believers, to the saints at Rome. So it all kind of goes together. But this kind of ties back in to something from Romans chapter 4. So let's go back and read that real quick. He's talking about Abraham, and verse number 17 to begin with, it says, "As it is written, I have made you a father of many nations, in the presence of him whom he believed, God, who gives life to the dead and calls those things which do not exist as though they did." Now listen to verse number 18 right here. He says, "Who contrary to hope, in hope believed, so that he became the father of many nations, according to what was spoken, so shall your descendants be." Now that kind of seems strange right there, the way it's written. It says, "Who contrary to hope, in hope believed." Now, what does it mean there that Abraham hoped against hope, or contrary to one hope, in hope he believed? Because there's really, hope can be used good or bad, positive or negative. It's really determined by what it's based upon. Now, Abraham had a life experience, he and Sarah, of living years and years and years and not having a natural seed or a child born from them. They went for many, many years. In fact, they were up in years at this point when God first spoke to him. He was about 75. Sarah was 65. It went on for a while, and when it actually was manifested in his life, Abraham was 100 years old and Sarah was 90. At that point, most people are not thinking about starting a family, okay? But Abraham was promised by God a seed coming out of his own loins from he and Sarah. And that went against all natural possibility. And in doing so, he had to go against the hope that was based on circumstances. It was based on what he could do, what man could do at that time, which was not give him a child, he and Sarah a child at 100 and at 90 years old. It had to go against all natural reasoning. It had to go against all natural experience that he had. See, all that had built an expectation of him of disappointment, coming up short, not having the desired result. And so Abraham had to take God at his word. He had to believe God. He had to take his word, and he had to, against that hope that had been built in him all his life, he had to uproot that, renovate his hope life, and build another hope in his life. That was hope that was based on God. And really, this is all in context right here, what he's talking about. Because, we think that statement that we just read over there in Romans chapter 5, verse 5, we think, well, I've been disappointed. I've had my hopes up before, and I've had my hopes dashed. I've been ashamed. I've been empty-handed before. And that builds in us many times an expectation, which is a hope. It's an expectation of being disappointed. But the problem is with that, we have built our hope on the wrong things. We built our expectation on the wrong things. See, just like Abraham, he had hope, but it was built on the wrong thing, and it produced disappointment in his life. Well, just like us, many times the enemy has trained us in disappointments. He has built in us a hope that's contrary to Bible hope. So we wouldn't even accept that statement right there. Hope will not leave us disappointed or ashamed, but you have to understand what it's based on right there. See, most of the hope that we've had in life that has produced disappointments one after another in our life, very few of our hopes and dreams have really come into reality to a large degree. Proverbs chapter 13, verse 12 has an answer for that. It says, hope deferred makes the heart sick. Now, what is a sick heart? That would be a heart that's been disappointed. It's been discouraged. It's been frustrated. It's depressed. It's oppressed. And hope deferred will make a heart sick. It will make it discouraged, frustrated, disappointed, and left ashamed. But it says, but the desired result is like a tree of life. So he's really talking in Proverbs 13:12 about two different kinds of hope. He's talking about a hope that's based on the wrong thing that'll leave us disappointed, leave our heart sick. It'll crush our desires, crush our dreams. But then it says, but the desire, when the desire comes, it's a tree of life. That would be the right kind of hope. So what kind of hope is this that will not leave us ashamed or disappointed? Well, again, let's go to Romans 5:5. It says, now hope does not disappoint because this is what this kind of hope is based on right here. This kind of hope. Now, again, what is hope? Well, our definition from last week, we'll just bring that right in. Hope in the Bible, hope according to the New Covenant, means a confident expectation of God's goodness manifesting in your life. A confident expectation of God's goodness manifesting in your life. If we've had hopes that have been built up but have been left ashamed, red-faced, empty-handed, or disappointed and left us frustrated, it was not built on what this is right here. This kind of hope that will not leave us ashamed or disappointed says, because the love of God has been poured out in our hearts by the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. So hope, Bible hope that will not leave us ashamed or disappointed, Bible hope, confident expectation of God's goodness in our life, is built on the reality, on the fact of God's unconditional, unfailing love towards us. And see, that's what we've been looking at for the last 6 weeks in this podcast, these devotionals. We've been looking at the reality of God's unconditional, unfailing love for us. See, if it's unconditional and unfailing, then that means it's not going to leave us, it's not going to fail us, it's not going to run out. Our hope can be built squarely on God's love for us, and it will not let us down. See, we've had our hopes and our expectations many times built on what we can do, what man can do, what man-made institutions can do, what man-originated wisdom can do in our life, and other things that were shaky already. If the foundation of your hope is shaky and uncertain, then your hope will probably come crashing down at some point and leave you disappointed. So we need to build our hope, our confident expectation on something solid, on something that is not going to change, something that's not going to fail, something that's unconditional. It's not based on us and what we do. It's not based on men and what they do. It's based squarely on God and who He is. And that's the kind of hope, that's the kind of confident expectation that's going to leave us not disappointed, but with the desired result, which becomes that tree of life that we're talking about. So we need to look at this. Now, last week, I think toward the end of the week, we began looking at verse 5 and then the following verses. He goes on to describe the God kind of love, this love that our hope, our expectation should be based on. Now he says in verse number 6, he says, "For when we were still without strength, in due time Christ died for the ungodly." See, that was all of us at one time. Christ died for us when we were ungodly. God loved us so much while we were on the other side, when we were at our most needful spot and least deserving time in our life. God's love did not fail us. It did not diminish. It did not break down under the pressure or the weight of our own failures, mistakes, sins, and shortcomings. And that's what he's telling us right here. This is the kind of hope that we need to, or this is the kind of thing we need to build our hope on, which is this kind of love right here. That when in the worst possible scenario, when we were least deserving and needed it the most, when we were the ungodly, God's love did not fail us. It came to pass in our life and did not leave our hopes dashed and by the wayside. Now he goes on in verse 8 and says, "But God demonstrates His own love for us, in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us." Notice that Christ died for us while we were still sinners. Not when we were saints, not when we had cleaned up our act and deserved it. That never was the case. Notice that Christ died for us while we were still sinners. Again, he's describing the God kind of love. But really in context here, as we've already pointed out, he's not just describing the kind of love that God had for us while we were ungodly and sinners, because in verse number 9 he says, "Much more then, having now been justified by His blood, we shall be saved from wrath through Him." Notice that if it did not fail us, if God's love did not fail and break down while we were ungodly and sinners, how much more now that we've been justified, declared righteous, cleared of all guilt by the finished work of Jesus and by His shed blood, can we expect God's goodness to come to pass and show up for us in our life? See, he's building our hope on the right thing here. Just like Abraham had to go back and rebuild his hope on the right thing, we have to go back and build our hope on the right thing as well. It's built on something that's unconditional, unfailing, will not break down under the worst possible conditions and scenario. How much more now? Under less desirable or under less circumstances, under less bad conditions, we can say, can we count on God's love showing up for us in our life today? it's worth going into and being rooted and grounded in the love of God. Because when we're rooted and grounded in God's love for us, that's where we're going to be able to build our hope. Expectation, confident expectation in God's goodness showing up and manifesting in our life to change the kind of things, the circumstances we're dealing with in life, just like it did with Abraham there in Romans chapter 4. Well, that's all the time I've got for today, Monday, but if you'd like additional materials, go to tonycowan.org. Join us again tomorrow. We'll see you then.